I actually did this analysis a few months ago in all the incoming deals or things that conversations we had. And I'm like, how many of these actually had one female founder? Is like 1 in 12. When you're building something, right, your question is this worth my time building? Does it have a big enough market for me to operate in, right? Those are not the questions the CISOs ask themselves, right? The CISOs don't care how much time you spend building the product. They just want you to solve the problem. Just as the name of your podcast, I think Be Fearless is not just something to say, it's actually something to practice. I remember years ago, one of my colleagues told me, said, hey, you're going to be starting a business someday. I'm like, really, me? I wasn't even thinking about that back then. And he kind of believed in me before I believed in myself. But took me many years after that to really build up that confidence to step out of my comfort zone to start a business. When I look back, I could have done it a few years earlier. I would be totally okay.
Hi, Chenxi. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I just want to give a brief introduction to our listeners, who you are, what you do. So you've been in cybersecurity space for quite a number of years, and you're actually founder and the general partner of Frame Capital, a Silicon Valley venture fund focused on cybersecurity investments, AI, and all sorts. But I think that actually just scratches the surface of what you actually do. You're also a board member at a Fortune 500 company.
Former Fortune 500, yeah.
Still, it's part of it.
We did spin off, so we're a little smaller now, but we used to be Fortune 500, yes.
Yes. And you're also a founder of Fort Group. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Forte Group.
Forte Group, where you support women in tech.
Yes.
And you also held executive positions at companies like Intel, Forrester Research, and even you have a PhD in computer science.
Yes.
So you've done so many things. I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions on each of these areas. But maybe just to kick things off is, how did you end up in cybersecurity space? How did this whole journey start?
Yes, it's an interesting question because it's accidental, actually. So when I was in grad school, you do a degree, you have to pick an area of research. I joined the research group of a professor, Bill Wolf. Bill was a pioneer in computer science. He built some of the early operating systems, which led to sort of groundbreaking innovation in operating systems. And he did compiler research, and he was at one point, he was the president of the National Academy of Engineering in the U.S. Anyway, so I joined Bill's group, and Bill had two research areas. One's computer architecture, and the other one is computer security. So he said, look around, talk to like senior students and pick an area you like. So I looked at architecture. I'm like, oh, it's kind of boring. And his computer security projects at that time were applied crypto. And cryptography, not cryptocurrency. And I really like math, and cryptography is more or less about math. So I said, okay, I can do this. So I started my master's project in applied cryptography and then went on to do a PhD in computer security. And that's how I started.
Wow, that's such a fascinating journey. And I don't think we had many guests that actually were also lecturers at university. I wonder how and to what extent do you think it gave you an edge when it comes to cybersecurity investment?
I don't know if the lecturing gave me an edge per se, but the PhD level research really taught you to ask questions critically and think about problems deeply. And I think those two things help me in making investment decisions and talking about innovations and questions about challenges. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's I think you really have to be critical in this space, because I think a lot of people can say that there is lots of noise, but you really have to be in depth.
Yep.
So I'm curious, how do you sort of understand which areas right now the most promising and which ones are less promising, as we approach RSA? This is practically RSA.
So it's interesting because before the conference I did a survey on LinkedIn. I said, hey, it's 1 week to go. What do you think is the top theme of this year's conference? So on LinkedIn, they only give you 5 options to do a survey. And I did securing AI/agents, data security, continuous threat exposure management, and AI-enabled detection response. And the last one was hardware security. So 5 areas. Guess which one got the most votes? It was
AI agents?
securing AI and /agents was the most votes. And then I think CTEM, continuous threat exposure management, was second. And then was AI-enabled detection response. Then was data security, and hardware security, interestingly, got the lowest vote. But I just came back from Innovation Sandbox, and there are 10 finalists. 2 of them were on hardware security. So I wasn't too off the mark on hardware security being a rising trend, right?
It's I think there might be so much noise when it comes to AI. So it's interesting to see that most of people kind of picked up that category, and then the finalists were in slightly different categories. So how do you distinguish through that noise of data out there what is really promising? Because I think word AI gets a little bit overused.
Yeah. So AI is, if you come down to the basic, it's pretty simple, right? It's a model that's trained on a corpus of data, and then you're using the model in some ways, right? So when you look at applications, AI applications that either encompasses the model or uses the model in some ways, basically you ask question, whose model is it? Right? Is it your model? Is somebody else's model? If it's your model, what data do you have to train the model? What gives you the advantage of having a model that other people cannot have, right? So that's one question. Second is, if you're using somebody else's model, what are you bringing to the table that someone else cannot bring, right? So once you break the problem down to that level of basic components, the question's actually pretty simple.
Okay. And what do you see when it comes to companies and AI? What is right now missing that they think, hey, I think there is a lot of questions around, do we stop AI? Do we help it foster? What do you think?
I think AI is a trend that cannot be stopped, right? It's like innovation that wants to go forward. The question we have is, how do we move forward in a secure, responsible, safe fashion? And that's what I think this week's conference is about, right? There's so many new innovations, companies, and solutions built on that premise.
I know that you're actually also going to be doing a talk at RSA on startup journey from seed to IPO.
We are actually doing 2 panels. So 2 investment panels. One of them is a keynote panel on Wednesday. And so 2 panels, both about startups, but from different, from different points of view.
Yeah. Any teasers that you can give to our listeners?
Sure. I think the first panel, which is going to be on Tuesday, I think 1 to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that one is really about investors' point of view, right? Different stage of investors. How do we pick companies? How do we help companies grow? And what do we look for in terms of metrics? The Wednesday panel is about both investors and founders.
Okay.
Right. So how do founders view the startup journey? How do investors view the startup journey? We're going to have the CEO of SentinelOne on the panel with us about his journey and how he works with investors. So it'll be a fun conversation.
I'm sure it will be very fun. And I think some people find sometimes there is this mismatch between founders' expectations and investors' expectations.
Yeah.
What do you think are some areas that still need to be talked about and discussed when it comes to this match?
Yes, I think it's a good question, and there are a lot of places I do see that, when founders, what they think about how they want to build the company and how investors wish you built the company are different. For instance, a founder may be perfectly happy building a company at 10% increase a year and gradually building up. Investors cannot wait that long, right? So if you invest money in a company and if 10 years there's no return, I might as well put money in the stock market, right? Why would I invest in this startup, right? So, honestly, for investors, it is about returns. For founders, it's about building a business. Now, when the two goals are aligned, magic happens. When they're not aligned, then all hell breaks loose, right?
Yeah.
So I think as a founder, before you raise money, you have to think about, is my goal aligned with an investor's goal, right? The investor may want a return of capital in, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. Am I willing to work on that pace, right? If I'm not, then maybe I shouldn't raise capital. Right. The worst is you raise capital, then you say, hey, I don't want to work in that kind of manner. Yeah. Right. And then investors were like, well, why did you raise money then? Right. So I think have a frank conversation about how you see the business and how the investor sees the business progress before you sign on the dotted line is very important.
Yeah. Some people even compare this founder-investor relationship to a marriage that is going to last at least, from 3 to 10 years, even more.
It is a marriage in the sense that you are putting your faith in an initiative together, the founder with his or her time and the investor with his or her capital, right? And we all in this together. Now, the difference is that the founders typically have more of an insider view of the business and they make decisions. The investors typically outside the decision-making process unless you're making board-level decisions, right? So investors don't get into, who you hire or what marketing agency you go with, those kind of operations decisions. Yeah. So, sometimes founders make the wrong decision and then have to answer for it, right? Yeah. There are really great investor-founder relationships. There are also challenges in that dynamics. We just have to see how we get over challenges.
Yeah. How, in your opinion, how much investors in cyberspace should be hands-on versus hands-off? Is there a perfect formula for that?
Investors should always be hands-off to some degree. Right. If you're hands-on, then you're not being an investor, you're being an operator. right? So we have to remind ourselves we're not an operator. We're not an executive of the company. We are an investor. What that means is we support the company, but we also have governance responsibilities. But we're not operators, right? So we shouldn't get into the operations decisions. Now, there are times we do because the founder needs help, needs support at that level. But most times we are what we call is we hands off, nose in, right? Nose in because you want to ask questions, but hands off. Now, I'm an early stage investor. Early stage investor, we often support at a more concrete level. So we would do some of the operations like creating leads and helping with go-to-market or helping with feedback on product strategies. We would do that.
How much do you think there is this sort of alignment when it comes to, what founders expect from investors? And, I just saw the news, so many companies raise money prior to RSA. And then once RSA came, there's like a big announcement, everyone raising money. Do you think today founders understand that, hey, like there is this expectation from investors?
Yeah, I think some founders do. Some founders don't, right? I have encountered a founder, for instance, a founder said, I just want to build technology. I just want to build product. I don't want to sell. I don't want to be out there and selling. I hate selling. And then you're like, what do you think a startup is? It is about selling a product, right? If you just want to build technology, you don't have to build a startup or you don't have to raise money, right? So I think especially first-time founders may have that disconnect between what they want to do and what investors expect.
Yeah, it's very important to have this alignment of who expects what.
Yeah.
And regarding investment into women founders, right?
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of cyber companies where you see women founders? I feel like
very few, very, very few. We talk to a lot of prospects, right? A lot of companies. I can say that about 1 in every 12 conversations involve a female founder. I actually did this analysis a few months ago in all the incoming deals or things that conversations we had. And I'm like, how many of these actually had one female founder? Is like 1 in 12.
What do you think is the reason behind?
I don't know. There's probably a pipeline issue, but if you think about the community, there's definitely less women executives than there are men, and there's less women technologists than there are men. So by definition, there will be less women founders. But I think there's also, society-wise, and I'm talking about in the US, right? And there's a little bit of a common sort of understanding, or maybe it's the societal pressure that women tend to be the primary caretaker of a family. Right. And if you are a founder of a company, then you are,
sacrificing that part.
Yeah. So you may be sacrificing that part, or maybe you feel guilty you couldn't do it. So less women are willing to step out of their comfort zone to start a company. So that's a possibility. Right. So, and I think there are a lot of different reasons why that is the case.
Yeah. I saw somewhere this statistic, regarding general investment in women founders, the fact that it's typically they underinvested versus male founders, but then the success rate is actually higher because there is this tendency, if women do decide to become a founder, then they go all in. Do you see this being a case, or is it just general trend someone noticed and not necessarily replicated in data?
Yes, I'm not sure. I have to see the data for it. But I do agree that the women founders that I have encountered, many of them are super impressive. You know, they have broken the societal, bias first, right? Before they stepped out to be a founder. So I think they have that toughness built in already. And those that do break that bias to start this journey are intelligent, impressive, and very successful.
What kind of initiatives do you typically do at Forte Group? I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Yes, Forte. It's a French word, Forte.
Forte.
So
it's like strong, right?
No, it's like if I said this is my forte, basically this is the thing I do, right? It's like this is my jam. Forte is like that. So the Forte Group, we have almost 100 women executives. A lot of us are in cyber, some are in general technology. We're senior leaders, VP and above, a lot of C-level. We get together once every 2 weeks. We discuss different topics. Some of them are personal topics. Others are technology topics. And we have initiatives to support each other. We run newsletters about career opportunities, speaking opportunities. We highlight certain talents, and we help solve problems.
Yeah. And do you think are there any more like stubborn challenges that women still have to encounter in that space, right?
There are a lot of challenges. And as a women leader, sometimes the type of challenges you encounter may be a little bit different. And again, there's still built-in bias, right, towards a non-traditional executive or non-traditional leader. So that we have to fight that. And that's everywhere still.
Yeah. I think no matter which industry we are talking about, it's still quite present.
Yeah, very prevalent.
Yeah, but cybersecurity is definitely the space that it's a little bit more prevalent.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's more prevalent in cyber or other industries. I have to see the latest data. ISC Square usually publishes the diversity report every year about the workforce, right? I haven't seen the latest report, so I don't know what the number was. There was 1 year, 3 years ago, was like 11% of women. And then the year later, they jumped to 22% or 20%. I haven't seen the report after that, but I think even 20% is still a pretty low number, right?
Yeah, I have to bring it up. Like as we speak, I do notice that a lot of your answers are based on I want to see the data. I have to look into data, and I'm thinking the nature of venture investment, right, is such as especially early stage. A lot of it is gut feeling. How do you strike the balance between the two as a data-driven person when you have to trust the founder that you're investing in?
That's a really good question. Early stage investments, as the investments I do, we don't have a lot of data to go with, right? So you have to look at, yes, there's gut feeling, but there's also as much data as we can gather about the problem space, right? So I can talk to, if they come to pitch me about a specific problem, right? They're solving that problem. I can do research on that problem, right? I can talk to, 20, 50 practitioners, and I can have a somewhat non-scientific understanding of gathering the data to understand how important this problem is, right? I can also look into the backgrounds of the founders. And those are data, right? But sometimes they're quality data, not necessarily quantity, right? But then you have to make a call.
I'm sure reputation does play a strong role when it comes to investment and picking the right founder, picking the right team. And how much, I wonder, whenever you make the investment, I'm sure you're speaking to a lot of CISOs out there that tell, hey, this might be more interesting area. From what you might have heard most recently. What do you think are some of the challenges that they, say out loud?
CISO today.
Yeah.
I think DLP remains to be a challenge. Identity access management remains to be a challenge. DLP has been a challenge, right? The existing DLP solutions are quite difficult to use. And now with AI and everybody wants to collect data to train their AI models or use the AI models with, data security just becoming more of an issue. Identity access management traditionally, again, has been a really difficult solution area to deploy. It's very common for an enterprise to have an identity product rollout across like 4 years. There's nothing should take that long. Right. And in the era of AI now, that we really should not be accepting that kind of standard. Right. So people want to move faster and with easier to deploy solutions and better outcomes. Those two areas, I think, have a lot of challenges. And of course, securing AI becoming more of a topic area today. Right.
Yeah. Do you think founders hear those challenges? Because we spoke about AI agents, right? As most people find the most promising, but then the actual challenges are DLP and identity, right? Yeah. Do you think there is some sort of mismatch between what people are building versus what is really needed out there?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, because when you're building something, right, your question is this worth my time building? Right? And does it have a big enough market for me to operate in? Right? Those are not the questions the CISOs ask themselves. Right? The CISOs don't care how much time you spent building the product. Yeah. They just want you to solve the problem, right? And at a reasonable price, right? If you spend $10 million building a product they only willing to pay $50,000 for, then that's a mismatch. Right? And also CISOs don't necessarily want to deploy, hundreds of point solutions, right? They want things to be integrated, to work well together. But when you're building a product in a vacuum, which typically you do that in the beginning of the company, then you're not building the product that everybody wants, right? So,
I was actually speaking to a CISO right before you. And it was an interesting conversation. And I like to ask this question to a lot of guests is, do you expect one tool to sort of be able to replace a few other tools? Or do you expect it to be like a standalone solution? Because I think someone says, hey, I just want to have this one thing that would replace 3 other things. And someone says, I do understand the complexity of the process and it has to be as an additional layer. What do you think is the right approach?
I think there isn't a single answer to your question, right? It depends on the problem area. Some areas it's perfectly fine to bring in additional layer on top of your existing solutions to improve accuracy and efficiency. Other areas have been around for a while. I think it's time for the different solutions to consolidate and provide a single integrated platform for practitioners. So it really depends on what problem areas we're talking about.
What kind of integrated solutions come to mind that you think, hey, should be consolidated?
So a lot of cyber solutions about making a decision on a set of data. Vendor A can come to me and say, hey, I want to give me this set of data. I'll make a decision. I'll help you do security operations. Vendor B can come, hey, give me all your data and I'll make a decision in my analysis. I'll help you solve another related problems. A lot of times they asking similar data, right? So vendor A's product will reach out and integrate with your data sources. Vendor B comes in and also reach out and integrate with your data sources. Everybody's asking for log data. Everybody's asking for identity data. Everybody's asking for application data. Why do I, as a practitioner, need to give, I don't know, 60 different companies same set of data? It makes no sense, right? Because soon enough, I'll have this very spider-looking integration in my environment. Yeah. It's really unwieldy, right? So I think there's a lot of consolidation integration work that we could do to simplify and streamline those integrations. I could have one layer of data integration and then provide consolidated APIs to different products, do different things. Yeah. But it doesn't exist today.
Yeah, this is probably the area that should be addressed. And I'm sure something like this.
I think AI will solve the problem. It just takes time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do believe that, hey, AI can solve everything. But I do really think that it's going to take some time for the adoption. Because even in security space, right, the same problem of DLP comes along. People do want to use AI to fast track some processes.
Yes.
But then how to ensure that no data leakage happens? Do you see security leaders being more conservative with this or more bullish?
All points on the spectrum, right? So this morning I attended a CISO breakfast. It was actually RSA's official CISO breakfast. And we had about, 6, 7 CISOs at our table and different opinions. 2 of them block everything, right? So no AI usage is allowed. And then they have a very extensive approval process, right? If the legal department wants to use this specific use case of AI, they will review it. They will have you sign all kinds of papers and policy agreements. Then they open up, right? So that's one approach. Yeah. There's also another CISO that is in a PE-backed company, and they are being asked by their investors, like, every single department must use AI to prove that they are attaining maximum efficiency.
Really?
Yes. So you just 2 CISOs at our table at very opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right. So and that probably represents today what people do, right, on the different industry sectors.
Yeah. It must be also the kind of data that you're handling. How sensitive is the data?
Absolutely. And the use cases, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The sensitivity data is, I think, luckily what is happening today is you don't have to think of this problem as black and white. For example,
it's not black and white. Yeah. It's a continuum spectrum, right? People do different things. Like we have a CISO at our table who's from a energy utility company from Australia, and he's saying that if they are found to have a customer data leak, the regulators of Australia can force them to sell their utility assets.
Oh, wow.
So that's a penalty, right? So that's a huge penalty for a utility company. So they have to be very careful, right? So, and on the other hand, if you have a company that doesn't have customer data, they just, data that's not PII, and they use it to train the model, use the model, then the risk is a lot lower.
Do you think lots of these adoptions very much driven by regulations versus being innovative? Because, as example you brought up, right? It's very much regulation driven. I wonder if this sort of regulation wasn't in place, if the action would be similar.
I think a lot of AI adoption today is partially driven by novelty, partially driven by efficiency improvement requirements, right? I don't know if it's driven by regulations per se, but probably blocked by regulations, challenged by regulations. But yeah, so different companies make different decisions, certainly.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners would be interested in how do you think your investment approach at Rain Capital is different versus other investment companies out there that you think, hey, definitely gives an edge?
So we are an operator run, right? So I'm an operator, former operator, and technologist. So I'd like to think I'm closer to technology than maybe someone who hasn't really worked as an operator or hasn't really been an engineer or technologist, right? So that's why I'm not a late stage investor, because a lot of late stage investors are based on metrics and data. So I'm more based on my understanding of the market, right? Understanding of the technology. So I like to think that gives me an edge.
Yeah. Do you think there are certain areas that today overinvested or underinvested?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think hardware security is actually underinvested, and we're going to be looking at a dearth of, needs, demand for that, as there's so many robotics companies and drones and new hardware-based solutions out there. We're going to need hardware identities. We're going to need hardware supply chain risk management. We're going to need real-time, maybe threat detection, right? If you're going to have a robot in your house, for instance, the robot is going to know, how big every room is, how to navigate from the front door to your bedroom, for instance. Yeah. Those are very, very private data, right? You're going to be very concerned about data leaks, about safety, right? So those things all have to be solved before this, this AI-driven embedded AI becomes a reality.
Yeah, I actually, when I just arrived to San Francisco, it was my very first time using Waymo.
Oh yeah, I took a Waymo to get here.
Yeah, and I was sitting there, and it's the coolest experiences. But at the same time, I'm thinking, hey, I'm trusting my life, but to this machine, right? And
but when you take an Uber, you trust your life with a person.
Yeah.
Do you feel better with a person, or do you feel better with a machine?
I actually feel safer with a machine for some reason.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think right now, like for yourself, would you rather take Waymo or would you rather take Uber?
Oh, I'm way more likely to take Waymo. In fact, Waymo is in the city, right? In San Francisco. And when I go back home, which is on the peninsula, I will have to take an Uber to drive down there. And I remember last year I did this, right? Last year RSA, and Thursday I took a Uber to go home. And the minute I got into Uber, I'm like, oh, why is a guy in my car? I immediately was like, I wish there was nobody.
Yeah, yeah. I always wonder what is sort of the biggest driver when it comes to, us choosing one thing over the other, right? Is it really because we have more trust into technology, or is it because we just naturally, feel more comfortable that we don't have to do the small talk once we sit in the car? And similar, if we sort of extend this analogy into cyberspace, do we have sort of the trust into technology, or does it make the whole experience more seamless when it comes to adoption of new tools?
If human is making the decision of adopting new tools, similarly, humans making the decision of Uber versus Waymo, then there's always the emotional elements in there, right? Do I like this tool as a person? Do I like the company who's, generating this tool? Do I like the way the interface is designed? So there's a lot of different factors, I'm sure, go into the a choice of a certain tool. But I think at the end of the day, for a cyber security tool, it is about how much you solve the customer's problem. That will set you apart from anything else, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, let's say there are two companies that solve exactly the same problem, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but to what extent likability aspect plays an important role when it comes to this early stage product market fit, as you speak to founders, how much that personal likability is important?
Well, I mean, I think the personal aspects is important, but it's not important enough to override the capabilities of the product. Right? I may have a good relationship with the CISO, but he or she's not going to buy the product if they didn't like it. Right? So they have to like the capabilities. And on that basis, they can say, hey, I may have a better relationship with that company. When everything's being equal, then you can pick and choose based on non-product aspects. But the product capabilities have to be there first.
Yeah. What kind of capabilities? I know there are so many products out there, right? But what kind of capabilities do you think really distinguishes one product versus the other, and sort of the touch points that make the CISO go, wow, this is the product I want?
I think user experience matters a lot, right? And efficacy of the product matters a lot. Price, the amount of integrations I have to go through to use the product also matters a lot. And then it's the support, right? How do if I have an issue, can I get a person on the phone? Do I have good responsiveness from the company? All those things matter. But, I can give you an example. Years ago, I looked at a product that has really good efficacy, right? So it can catch attacks while it's ongoing as opposed to wait until it's over, which is really impressive. Yeah. However, the product just took them a long time to come out with a dashboard, with a console. And the CISO's like, okay, if there's an attack, maybe I'll trust you, stop it. But when there's no attack, I have nothing to look at, right? I cannot report to my management why I'm using this tool. And so they stopped. They're like, no, we don't. No, the POC didn't really yield satisfactory results, even though the efficacy of the product is there, but the user experience was not there. So I would say, all those aspects matter.
Does any particular company, other than this one, come to mind where you thought, hey, doesn't, like, you don't have to say the name, but where you saw this immediate product market fit, where you thought, okay, this is something that's definitely going to work, versus something that you thought would work, but it then didn't? I'm sure there are lots of examples.
So one of my companies is in the Innovation Sandbox Final 10 today. They have an open source product that allows vulnerability management professionals to very quickly zero in on to the tens of thousands of vulnerability reports, which one matters to you, and then focus on that. And they really accelerate the journey to take all the vulnerabilities and prioritize them, not just priority, but zero in on the ones that can be exploited, and then kick off the workflow. And that company, because it's open source, it was adopted like wildfire, right? They have 1 million active users, 100,000 GitHub stars. And we didn't spend a single marketing dollar on that, right? So that's a product market fit. Now, of course, they're building the rest in terms of enterprise capabilities and bells and whistles. But the core engine really is, people just love it. And that's an example of
That's amazing.
product market fit. Yes.
What do you think are some of the mistakes that founders oftenly make that they shouldn't be making?
So I gave you an early example where, they really focus on the detection capability, but didn't pay attention to user experience, right? So that's one. I think you really have to think about the product in the shoes of people who are going to be using a day-to-day basis, right? To say, what are they going to get out of interacting with my product? What will make them come back day after day to look at my product? Right? If you can answer those two questions well, then maybe you have something.
Yeah. Question related to the user experience, right? To what extent do you think products are supposed to be invisible to the end user? Because from one point of view, you wanted this great user experience, very light, very easy. But at the same time, then there is a question, is this tool really working? How do you know if it is actually working or my user is just like doing whatever they want to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think you have to look at the problem in two aspects. One is, how easy is it for my users to get the outcome? And second is, how good the outcome is.
Okay.
You want the outcome to be really good. But you also want the users not to do a lot of work to get there.
Okay.
Right? If they're spending a lot of their time just to get to the outcome, then you have not built your product well. And so that's a critical question to look at, is how much time people are spending on not actually doing the core work, but it's actually trying to get to the outcome.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, that's important question for founders to consider whenever user interface they're building, whatever solution they're trying to implement. And, so many attacks today actually happen on the browser, and the browser technology is becoming one of the hot topics these days. What is your vision when it comes to technologies that try to prevent and solve the attacks, as personal work life just combines into one whole thing?
Yeah, that's a hard question, because I certainly have not solved that myself. I work a lot, but I also take a lot of time for my family, for my personal hobbies. I'm a huge urban gardener. So I spend a lot of time in my garden, and it's my escape and my oasis. And so I try to balance it that way. But then there are times like, I only have 24 hours a day, and I have to say, do I spend this hour on my personal thing or on my professional thing, right? So I think we all make trade-off, make decisions between, work-life balance. And if you don't have the right balance or whatever right balance that's sanctioned by other people, I think you have to find a model that works for you. It doesn't have to be the same as other people's decisions or priorities. You just have to be okay with your choice and your decisions.
Yeah. I also think, like, from the perspective of attackers, right? What we see today is, because typically what users like to have is have a part of their personal identity out there, and then the work identity as well. So let's say you have your Gmail open, but then you have your WhatsApp web or LinkedIn open. And what attackers do nowadays is they like to leverage and they try to attack personal identity, and then that way get access to work assets. So from that focus, how do you think CISOs out there see this as an emerging attack surface versus if there is enough awareness?
Yes, I think this is definitely an emergent attack surface, and there is awareness out there, and there's already different approaches out there trying to manage this problem, right? Because, you are not just a podcast host. You also employee of a company. You also your own person. You have your personal life, and same with me, right? And it's very difficult to say, hey, we have a complete wall between your personal life and your professional life. It's impossible. And same with the applications we use, right? It's impossible to say, I'm only going to be opening up my work application versus, things maybe around that. I think the thing to do is recognize that's a risk and have visibility to the activities, the actions, and being able to control in real time if things go haywire.
Yeah.
Right. So having visibility is really important. Yeah. There's an emerging area, I think with AI, it's even more important. It's called human risk management. And so it's recognizing that human employees and users is a risk area, right? And how do we manage that risk? And it's about understanding how risky certain populations are. And then once you know that, what do you do with it?
Yeah. That makes me think of identity, right?
Yeah, it's partially identity, it's partially policy, it's partially activity-based monitoring, right? And then it's all the workflow around it, right? If you see Alexa is doing something, kind of not sanctioned or problematic, what do we do? Do we take away some of her critical access? Do we send her a real-time training video, right? Do we ask her to answer some questions to prove that she has not been compromised, right? So these are things that we should be working on.
Yeah, I think the part that you highlighted, visibility, right? Having visibility to what each person is doing, seeing all of this, really would encourage more conversations in the space. I think that is one of the biggest gaps nowadays. People sort of understand, but they need this visibility to make the decision whether to block something or whether not to do it.
And it's basically about data. Having the right data accessible in the right time to make a decision.
Yeah. It's all about being speedy, fast, and match the expectations of investors.
Well, yes.
Maybe coming to your personal advice to aspiring professionals out there. Maybe if you could reflect on your personal journey, right? What things maybe you would have done different as you were growing in your career, and what advice would you give to professionals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, just as the name of your podcast, I think Be Fearless is not just something to say, it's actually something to practice. I remember years ago, one of my colleagues told me, said, hey, you're going to be starting a business someday. I'm like, really, me? I wasn't even thinking about that back then. But he said, hey, I think you're going to be starting a business someday. And he kind of believed in me before I believed in myself, right? And but took me many years after that to really build up that confidence to step out of my comfort zone to start a business. And I think when I look back, I could have done it a few years earlier. I would be totally okay, but I just didn't have that confidence. I was afraid, right? So if I were to advise myself, is to be a little bit more fearless. And I think that probably is a good advice for a lot of people.
I think it's a good advice for all the people there. I saw somewhere this very interesting quote that said, someone who is not as smart as you is already like achieving their dreams, making the, next big company. And the reason to that is because they didn't stop to overthink the decision. They just went for it and they make it happen. But at the same time, I think it's a balance with the data-based approach.
Sure.
Because we all talk about successes. We don't talk about failures. And you as an investor yourself probably would know.
But I think we learn from failures, right? Failures are also good. May not be good for investors, but failures are good for learning.
Yeah.
Right. So, as if you want to do something differently in your career, it's good to learn fast and collect experiences and learn from those experiences in order to take the next step in a more informed way.
That is very true. It's just also the question of how good are you at bouncing back? Because some people would stop and overthink.
Yeah, don't overthink.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We have this little tradition, Chenxi, where typically our previous guest would ask question to our next guest.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So our previous guest asked this question to you, where he said,
without knowing who the next guest will be.
I typically give a bit of indication of like whether it's a CISO, whether it's an investor.
Okay.
But the question is quite general. So this person asked, where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? So very general question, but where do
I see myself in 10 years' time? Oh, wow. Interesting. I see myself traveling the world, sampling tasty cuisines everywhere, at the same time making a few investment decisions in very interesting early stage companies.
Do you think that you'd like this investment journey to be part of your journey all the time, whether you decide... I don't know. Some people don't like the concept of retirement. Some people, what do you think of it?
I think I will probably not going to be a black and white retiree, right? So I probably won't be saying, okay, from this day on, I won't do any technology related work. I probably will never be like that. I will always have one foot in technology, doing something related to cyber or high tech or AI. But on the other hand, maybe be able to enjoy life a little bit more in my retirement, that is.
Yeah, I think especially relevant for the Bay Area that is so busy. Everyone's working.
Yes.
Yeah, just to take a moment and appreciate the journey that you're going along.
Yes.
Where you're going to be. And what question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Are you going to tell me?
Likely a CISO.
A CISO. Okay. So, okay. I'm going to ask, what is his or her plan for life after CISO?
Yeah, there are lots of choices there.
Yes, lots of choices there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you saw yourself many examples. Is it like CIO, founder, I don't know, many other options there. Yeah. Great
could be founder, could be advisor, could be, investor and board member, other different things.
Yeah, exciting. Great question, Chenxi. Well, thank you so much for being part of our Be Fearless podcast. It's been a lot of fun having you here. I'm sure a lot of people are going to learn so much when it comes to cybersecurity investment or how to just be able to go through that noise of conversations, data, and really find what works and what doesn't.
And be fearless.
And be fearless, which is very important. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.